After passing high school, I decided to take a part-time job in a pizza joint to support my college education. I always preferred being self-dependent, so when my dad wanted to pay for college, I refused to take his help. After the classes in the morning, I had the entire day free, so instead of wasting time, I took this job at Domino's Pizza. I worked the night shifts 3 days a week. The payment was enough to keep me going without asking for money from my parents. They liked this headstrong attitude of mine, so my father gave me his old car to drive to work. It's an old black Chevy, one you can easily see in the 60s Hollywood movies. I loved this car a lot, because apart from being old, it had some personality. The day was Wednesday. I drove to the pizza place and was parking my car when I heard my boss yelling at Jeremy. Jeremy was our delivery guy and not much of a talker. Jeremy stood with a sad face while my boss shouted at him. "I don't understand. You are being quite irresponsible for the last few weeks, Jeremy. How could you just lose someone's order? The only reason I keep on tolerating you is that I know how tough things are for you and your mom right now. But one more mistake and you'll be out. This is your last warning." My boss, Mr. Macaron, got into his car and left for home. I walked to Jeremy and said, "Did you lose another order again?" "Yeah." "Let it be. You'll get better at this." Even though I said this, I couldn't help but think how weird he was. For the last few weeks, Jeremy always happened to lose a pizza somehow. He says he dropped it, misplaced it, the customer didn't answer the door, etc. I think he eats it and makes excuses so he doesn't have to pay for it. Mr. Macaron is not a nice guy, so he keeps a tab on every employee so we don't eat for free. I tried lending some money to Jeremy to save himself from this humiliation, but he denied it. I sat behind the counter waiting for the customers to arrive when the phone rang. "Welcome to Domino's Pizza. May I take your order?" "Yes, I would like to order a 5-meat feast. Make it large." "Sure, can I get your address?" "Yes, it's the house number 34, 2 blocks from your place." I noted down the contact number and the name of the customer and went to the kitchen to tell the night chef to prepare the order. When I came back, Jeremy asked me a pretty weird question. "Is that an order?" What else would it be? Are you alright?" "No, I'm fine." "So how many pizzas were ordered?" Just one. Here, take the address and number." Oh, it's not far." I expected him to be happy knowing he wouldn't have to drive far, but instead he seemed upset that the customer lived close by. But then quickly it hit me. He was upset he wouldn't be able to make up some story this time. As we waited for the order to be finished, Jeremy started walking back and forth, being all tense. I looked at him and said, "Hey, tell the chef to make one more. You can take it. I'll pay for it this time, but you have to stop eating the customer's orders." "That's what you think I do?" "What else makes sense? Tell me you're not stupid enough to lose a box of pizza every other day." Jeremy stared at me in a very creepy way and said, "You want to know the truth?" "Well, sure." "It's not me who eats them." "Then who is it, Jeremy? Is there something you're not telling me?" "I don't think you can handle the truth." The order came in, and taking the pizza in one hand, Jeremy rolled his eyes in anger and stormed out of the store. What does he mean by he is not eating these pizzas? And what is this truth he's talking about? I decided to find out once and for all what exactly is going on with this dude. We worked for a few more hours. Orders came in, and one by one, Jeremy delivered them all. When it was about closing time, I got a call from a customer complaining that they didn't get their order. I somehow managed the situation by telling them we ran short on supplies and closed for the night. Jeremy hadn't come back yet, so I waited to confront him. The night chef left, and I came out to pee when I saw headlights of Jeremy's car on the road. I stood in the corner under the shade so that he wouldn't notice me. He came out of the car but didn't walk in right away. He peeked inside the restaurant, trying to see if I was there or not, and then went back to his car. Realizing I wasn't around at the moment, he took out a box of pizza from his car and went around the back. I followed him silently. At the back, there is a storage unit. Thinking he was hiding there to eat this one, I peeked in. But Jeremy was inside the storage unit and talking to someone in a low voice. "This is the last time, Shelly. I can't keep you here anymore. I have to come up with some other plan, because if anyone sees you, they will kill you. But I don't want to go away. I love this pizza, especially after you add this secret ketchup." I've known Jeremy for a while. Shelly was none other than his 10-year-old little sister. But when I contemplated more on this thought, my body became numb with fear. There's no way Shelly is in that storage unit talking to Jeremy. Because a few months back, Shelly died falling from the roof. It was an accident, and that's why our boss feels obligated to keep him hired even after making many mistakes. What the hell is going on then? I couldn't believe my ears as I heard Shelly's voice. I tiptoed to the storage unit. As I looked inside from the half-closed shutter, my stomach dropped. There was no one inside except Jeremy. He was sitting there all by himself, holding the pizza in his right hand and looking at some invisible being. What happened next was probably the sickest thing I'll ever witness in my entire life. Jeremy took out a paper knife and cut his palm. He then said, "Now, finish your dinner. I know you are very hungry. I just hope Mom will let you come home again. Then I won't have to hide you anymore." He then sprinkled his dripping blood all over the pizza like ketchup and said, "Enjoy it with your special ketchup, Shelly." And then got up and sat on the opposite side and said in the voice of a 10-year-old girl, "Yes, I will. Domino's makes the best pizza." He then started to eat the pizza wrapped around his blood. The way he was chomping on the pizza and smearing the blood on his mouth while laughing like a creepy girl made my skin crawl. I finally understood why he said he doesn't eat them. Though Jeremy was eating, he was playing the role of his dead little sister in his mind. It didn't take much time for me to realize that his sister's death hammered him to such an extent that he created an alter ego within himself that talks like Shelly. So even if to everyone he was Jeremy, in his mind he was Shelly eating and talking. I had no choice but to call the cops. When they came and took him away, he wasn't saying a single word. He was just looking around, searching for someone. After this incident was revealed, Jeremy's mom almost died out of a heart attack. The doctors told her that her son suffers from a dissociative identity disorder. In his mind, he thinks his sister is alive and that he has to take care of her until her mom lets her come back home. The gravity of this mental illness is so horrifying that he completely zones out when he plays his sister's role. His voice becomes like a 10-year-old. He sits and behaves like his sister. Years have gone by after this incident, but I still keep in contact with Jeremy. He is now in a mental institution. The last time I visited him, he said some pretty disturbing stuff to me. He looked at me in the eye and replied, "If Shelly comes knocking at your door in the middle of the night, don't forget to bring her pizza from Domino's, and do add her favorite ketchup." I enjoyed working the night shift at my local Domino's most of the time. There weren't many orders coming in after 8 o'clock. The town was small, sleepy, and a little boring, if I'm being truthful. That was all fine by me. The night shift paid $16 an hour and gave me ample opportunity to catch up on my reading. So, when an order came in around 10 on a freezing December night, I wasn't too thrilled to pick up the phone. I considered letting it ring out, but got nervous that it might be my boss checking up on me. I grabbed the receiver on the fifth ring. Domino's Pizza, what's up? The person on the line didn't respond at first. I heard him breathing softly, a little fast, like he was excited. Large cheese pizza, a man's voice said eventually. That's it? No reply. Okay, where am I taking this? The man whispered an address, then hung up before I could tell him the total cost of the order. I sighed and got up from my chair to start the pizza. Ask anybody who knows me, and they'll tell you I'm an aggressively lazy person. I don't disagree, but I try to use that to my advantage, to make myself efficient so I can get away with doing as little work as possible. I rolled out the dough, tossed it in the air a few times until it was as wide as a small bicycle wheel, then plopped it on the counter. Sauce, toppings, oven. The whole process took me less than 10 minutes, and then I was in my beat-up car on my way to deliver the order. I recognized the neighborhood my GPS directed me to immediately. My town was so small that there weren't many streets I didn't know. In fact, the address for the delivery belonged to a former high school classmate of mine, Brandon something. The voice that called into Domino's didn't sound like the guy I remembered, but it was a decade since our graduation, so whatever, people change. The house was a 2-story colonial, mundane in every way. The only odd thing was that the lights were off and there was no car in the driveway. If somebody hadn't just ordered a pizza, I would have just assumed the house was unoccupied. Nobody answered when I rang the doorbell. After 4 more rings and several minutes, I started knocking. The pizza was getting cold and I didn't want to get in trouble for a late delivery. Plus, I looked like a goofball standing there in my Domino's polo in front of a dark house. A full minute of knocking later, I decided to try the door on a whim. It was unlocked. I went back and forth for a few seconds, then decided to open the door so I could call out. "Anyone home?" I yelled, head poking in the open door. The house was pitch black. "Hey, I have a pizza here. Hello?" No reply. In for an inch, in for a mile, I figured, leaning in further to paw at the wall for a light switch. When the lights clicked on and revealed the living room, I screamed. There were 2 bodies on the floor. A man and a woman, both in their late 20s or early 30s. It was difficult to tell since both corpses were missing their heads. Someone had also hacked the limbs off each body, then placed the arms and legs in a neat pile on the couch. There was blood everywhere, on the walls, soaked into the rug, even splattered on the ceiling. I ran and didn't stop running until I was inside of my car. I hit the gas and lurched forward. It was several minutes before I stopped hyperventilating enough to call 911. After the operator calmed me down, I pulled into the nearest parking lot to wait for the police. A cruiser pulled in a little later, and 2 officers took my statement. They told me another car was heading towards the house where I found the bodies. I didn't go back to work to lock up that night. Actually, I didn't so much leave my bedroom for the next week except to use the bathroom and eat. Domino's was perpetually short-staffed at the best of times, so after 8 days of coaxing, I finally let my supervisor talk me into taking another shift. I was still rattled but needed the money. According to the news reports, the investigation into the double homicide I discovered was still ongoing. They managed to ID the headless bodies, though the man was Brandon Myers, my former classmate. The woman was his wife. The identity of the man who ordered the pizza to their address was still unknown. I stared at the phone as it rang. It stopped after 8 rings. I counted. I finally let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. I'm not sure why I answered. I guess I didn't want to be scared of picking up a phone for the rest of my life. I reached for the receiver with trembling hands and pressed it to my ear. "Hello?" I asked. "Large cheese pizza." It was the same voice. I was frozen, unable to respond or hang up. After a pause, the voice whispered an address into my ear. Then the phone went dead with a click. I spent the next 5 minutes staring at the wall before snapping out of it. I called 911. "I think there's been a murder," I told the dispatcher. The police came to Domino's about an hour later. They'd visited the address I gave them but couldn't find anything suspicious. The house appeared to be abandoned. They weren't able to check inside without a warrant, but performed a walkthrough of the property and got a good look at most of the first floor through the windows. Nothing out of the ordinary. I thanked the officers and tried to get back to work. Barely 15 minutes after they left, the phone began to ring again. I watched the receiver vibrate in its cradle like a rattlesnake, threatening to bite if I got too close. Once again, I couldn't help myself. I had to know who was calling. "What do you want?" I asked. Silence, quick breathing. Then the man's voice again, with the same order and same address, the ones the cops just visited. "Who are you?" I asked, but he'd already hung up. I weighed my options. If I sent the police over there again and they found nothing, they might not answer the call next time. But if I delivered the pizza and found another gruesome crime scene, I wasn't sure my sanity could take it. I ignored the order, but had a strong hunch the man would keep calling. I made a decision. I wouldn't live in fear. Instead of making the pizza, though, I went behind the counter. We kept a taser under the cash register at Domino's, just in case a psycho came in and the staff needed to protect themselves before police could arrive. I hid the taser in an empty pizza box, went out to my car, and started driving. When I pulled up to the address the mystery caller provided, I could see why the police thought the house was abandoned. Kudzu and vines crawled up one side of the single-story rancher. There were shingles missing from the roof, and one of the windows had a massive crack in the glass. I approached the weather-beaten door with my pizza and knocked. There was no doorbell. The door swung open on my third knock, just like the last time. The interior of the house was dark. Delivery, I called out. There was a sudden movement from the darkness to my left. A shadow darker than the rest, moving fast. I barely had time to react. Somehow, I managed to grab the taser from the box and fire it into the shape as it rushed me. There was the click-click-click of the prongs activating, pouring electricity into the wires hooked to the thing attacking me. The shadow screamed, tripping and falling into the rectangle of light that came from my headlights and the open door. It was a man, tall and scrawny, dressed in denim and flannel. He had wild gray hair and a black beard, and the most hateful eyes I'd ever seen. The stranger tried to get up, pawing at the taser prongs hooked to his chest. Before he could pull them out, I hit him with another dose of electricity, then another. He collapsed to thrash on the floor, muscles convulsing, back bending. I kept the hooks in him while I called 911, but he looked like he'd passed out. The cops were there in 7, I remember. I counted. It was the longest 7 minutes of my life. I found out later through a friend on the police force just how lucky I was that night. When the cops searched the house, they found a kill room in the basement. The stranger had covered the space in clear plastic sheeting and dragged a table into the middle of the room. He brought tools with him: a hacksaw, knives, shears, duct tape, zip ties, and bleach. But it was the deranged man's confession that was truly chilling. He casually told the cops every terrible thing he planned to do to me. He'd pull me apart just like he'd done to the couple I'd found murdered a week before. Then, once he'd arranged my corpse just how he wanted it, he'd call in a delivery order. That was his fetish, making innocent people discover his victims. If I hadn't acted fast with a taser, I would have been killed and laid out on the floor like a department store display. Then some poor Chinese takeout driver or subrunner would have been called to the house to find my brutalized remains. I don't work at Dominos anymore. I found a safer job, fighting forest fires.